Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar SAP Business Blueprint Auto Generation. I'm Mark Beebe, Marketing Campaign Manager for Worksoft, and your host for today's session. First, a couple of logistical points. We have a large number of people on the call today, so the lines will be muted. But we will take questions toward the end of this 60-minute broadcast. Please use the question feature to submit questions at any time during the webinar. For questions that we can't get to during the Q&A session, we'll be sure to get back to you with an email reply. We will also make a link to the recording of this webinar available for registrants who were unable to make it, or perhaps for colleagues you think might benefit from the material. Let me now introduce our speaker. We are privileged to have Chris Kraus with us today. Chris is Worksoft's Director of Product Management for Certify and an expert in the field of test automation. Chris holds patents in service virtualization and testing technologies. During Chris's world travels, he has managed to combine his passions for photography and yoga practice. Over the last 25 years, he has served in a wide variety of engineering and product management roles, including most recently for CA Technologies. Today, Chris is responsible for the strategic direction of Worksoft's flagship products, Worksoft Certify and Worksoft Analyze. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Mark. So today we're going to talk a lot about blueprints and how they work within the SAP Solution Manager. So initially I'll talk about actually what is the value of a blueprint in SAP, kind of a little primer, because there's some things that have changed in how Solution Manager works. And then how do we look at auto-generating those blueprints? And then we'll look at our specific integrations between Worksoft and Solution Manager so that you realize you've got a nice one-stop shop to work with. So of course it's always interesting when you talk about process, and probably it's low-hanging fruit to Google a Dilbert and find that there's always something really interesting. You know, in order to avoid shouting mistakes, everyone will now be part of a documented process. So as you can imagine, you've probably all run across this, and we always talk about documenting and blueprints, and you know, it's a little bit of art we found when most people are working on these things. So why would you actually want to start looking at your blueprints in Solution Manager? So part of it is how do you actually unlock the power in Solution Manager? It starts with documenting the business process. In SAP terms, it is the single point of source of truth for SAP to understand your business process so that things like BPCA or Change Analyzer can work. Blueprints are needed to be ready, they need to be updated, and moreover, they need to be maintained to ensure they keep that single point of truth. So a blueprint isn't something that you set up and you do your launch and you deploy SAP. It's something that you actually update on a regular basis. As you change your business, maybe you do mergers and acquisitions, you deploy new modules, there's something that actually needs to be fed, so they're always that single point of truth. When we look at solution documentation, a blueprint really does give us a library of our executables, our process steps, and our business processes and our test cases. So, of course, this is kind of that whole life cycle we're going to dive quite deeply into. But what we need to realize is when we say test cases, they could be manual or they could be automated. And you'll notice Worksoft Certify actually shows up as a partner solution that's certified for SAP. So a document improvements in SAP Solution Manager. So 7.2 has been out for a while now, but a lot of people still don't understand the differences in it. And probably the largest material difference you'll notice is the intuitive process visualization. In the past, the processes were kind of linear. Now it actually looks like a BPMN project. You actually have standardized flowcharts looking through the process themselves. They've really simplified the landscape management, and actually the process management is much more flexible. And you're no longer tied to that strict three-tiered hierarchy. You can actually place the hierarchies the way you need them, which may make more sense based on your SAP deployment. I mean, I have some customers who run one SAP for multiple regions or countries, so their hierarchies are more complex than someone who may run a SAP instance for each country or each division of the company. So it's actually just gotten a lot easier to reflect your business processes and easier in terms of redocumentation itself. So we're really kind of keen on the new features within 7.2. So if we think about what do we actually get with these blueprints and what are they driving, why do I need to do them? We have scenarios and processes and steps and so forth. But really what they do is help us to drive our testing activities, our business process monitoring activities, and that could be the traditional, the MAI, the MAI, and then our solution manager upgrade. So when we upgrade our solutions, a lot of times people are very worried about risk-based analysis. What is changing? What do I need to retest? So we start off by getting an accurate blueprint, and all these components actually leverage it. And the idea is it should make your environment much more stable and easy to upgrade. So I mentioned BPCA, or Business Process Change Analyzer. This is actually one of the key things that blueprints use. Blueprints, what they actually do, or what they mean in terms of Solution Manager, is you have an adequate business process repository in Solution Manager. So this means I need to understand what are all my solutions and all my steps. Those steps or the transactions are actually associated with your programs or your T-code. So we're basically telling Solution Manager, I use VA01, VLO1, VSO3, so forth. What are my different relevant T-codes? There could be programs underneath those, okay? And then we actually can define test cases for those. So what we're doing is describing my business process, how the user goes through the system, and then I want to define my test cases so I can validate those mission-critical business processes through there. What we want to do is then upload those test cases into Solution Manager so they can be run. Now, why would you run them? Well, one is because I just want to make sure everything's running. Another is for a T-bomb, because the T-bomb is kind of that magic linchpin for BPCA. The way BPCA knows that a change in code or an update that you've provided or transport from SAP affects your existing business processes that are documented is because you run a T-bomb. So you trace those things by running the transactions, and it says, based on your transport, this is what changed, this is what we should test. Now, of course, this always sounds pretty simple, and everybody nods their heads, we should do this, we need to start doing this, but there's a lot of challenges to get accurate blueprints in place, accurate test cases defined, and then get them exercisable. Okay? So if we think about that process, if I need to get an accurate blueprint, the first thing I need to do is figure out what does my business process look like. So in the manual realm, what a lot of people do is they start a notepad session. They start walking through their application. They talk about, I'm going to log in. I then enter a transaction. They document the transaction and the data. And then they step through the screens. And all of a sudden you realize these screens get more and more complex. And you've got a lot of function keys and different validations that happen and tables of data. So quite honestly, it's pretty hard to step through this and create a document for that. So we're suggesting there is actually a better way than starting with manual documentation and worth asking your end users to do that. It's called business-driven automation. So let's go discover what tests are most important to our end users, because the end users are really the system of truth, or single point of truth for what my business processes are. We want to enable those users to be more effective and then help you scale your business. Now, of course, we're part of the SAP Partner Network. That's why we're a certified testing solution, or we're certified with Solution Manager. But more importantly, we have some really, really large SAP shops who use our technology. So you've got SAP, IBM, and Accenture all use Worksoft to test our SAP instances. So quite honestly, when we say we're industry leaders in this, we've done it for a long time. We do have a lot of expertise, and it's proven by our vast customer base. So I'm going to start introducing how we're going to solve this problem of figuring out what my blueprints should look like. What are the actual users doing in the field? So we're going to use something called Analyze, which is going to help us build our automated tests and discover what's actually happening. So discovery means we can actually observe a user walking through SAP kind of quietly and note their T-codes, and we can then traverse and figure out the programs they're running, the data they're putting in, or we can synthesize this from historical records. Okay? The next thing we can do is actually visualize this process to the user so they understand what does it look like, what are the common paths, what are the not common paths, based on usage, and then we can explore them. Maybe we do that for some process analysis, or we just look at exporting those things into BPMN notation or Solution Manager. So instead of going back to the earlier session where I said, let me start my SAP GUI and open my notepad, what I'm going to do is actually let our discovery technologies tell me what the real users did. And I can see that they came to the system during VLO1, and they had some different variations across that process. Now what's interesting is we've determined that there's something called a signature, that not every VLO1 or sales order is the same. Some of them have different number of line items, which, that really doesn't matter. But they may use different folder tabs, they may enter PO numbers and different dates. So what happens is we identify what the end-to-end process is, and then when we see variations in the data used for transactions, so our sales orders, I've got 3 variations of sales orders, but interesting enough, the VLO1N is very consolidated. Everybody seems to use the same version of that transaction. So if our discovery technology is showing you graphically the T-codes are traversing and the variations of those processes, the other thing we do is we actually show you screenshots. So I can see different users have walked through this transaction. I can get details of which fields they've actually interacted with. So obviously, this is more fidelity than I need for a blueprint, but it is really, really handy to understand what your business process is, what your scenarios are. So we call it GenDoc. What we will generate from that picture is, for an instance, or a user walking through that workflow, we'll show you the screenshots, the specific SAP fields they've interacted with, and then give you that in a Word or a PDF. So obviously, this will be helpful when we go to document our blueprints, but you could use this for training materials or audits on Sarbanes-Oxley on how your processes are actually run. So we find business analysts and QA really like this because it's got a high fidelity screenshot. So once we've done this concept of automated business process analysis, we've seen all these different variations. Granted, this was done by software automatically. We can auto-generate our documentation, and we can export them. And the nice thing, understanding use counts, it tells us very easily what the happy path is for this transaction. So what we do is we literally say, if this is a subset of workflows for sales orders I'm very interested in documenting, we export them, and then we import them into Solution Manager 7.2 as a diagram and a blueprint. So I can see here, I can create my process library with all my different T-codes, and then I'll build my different variations of the diagram. So you'll notice our diagrams look pretty similar. SAP is strictly a BPMN flow view, so it should be easy enough to read. Ours is a variation of that because we took a little different way to untangle lines. But the core idea is if we've discovered through software what your business processes are by observing real users using the system versus guessing, and provide an automated way to build up your library of your steps and then create your diagrams, you're now ready to start using Solution Manager and leveraging the power of it. Okay? So how does this actually work? What I do in our technology is I discover, I open a workspace with my variants I'm interested in, and I click the Export button. From there, we select Solution Manager, 7.2 is my format, and then I get a series of documents created for me. So these documents are kind of XML format. I then download them, and then we have a nice little utility which then lets you upload this into your Solution Manager framework. So pretty low touch from our perspective. The software and the hardware is doing all the work for you. Okay? And then what happens is you get a nice library, and you get all your processes documented. So the idea is we want to make this as easy as possible because you're going to have to update this on a regular basis, right? The single point of truth that SAP talks about is when you do a major upgrade or a change, a merger or acquisition, change your business model a little bit, you're going to want to observe the real users with our software and then automatically generate an SAP's blueprint. And that's how you're going to keep them up to date on a regular basis. So our core value prop for you is actually we want to extend the value that you get out of Solution Manager. So don't think of it just something I use for transport. I actually want to use it for all the other capabilities of change analysis and monitoring, right? So Worksoft Analyze will discover the processes, we'll graphically show them, we'll consolidate them for you, and then we'll export those into blueprints. So what do we do with the blueprint? What is the life cycle within Worksoft? Okay, so what we say is let's go discover the as-is, analyze and visualize these so you can pick the processes that are your happy paths you want to do. We're going to generate the blueprints into Solman 7.2. Then what we need to do is actually go exercise those test cases we talked about on that first slide to generate the T-bombs so BPCA can do a great job of telling us our risk-based testing approach, right? So when we do that in discovery, we can automatically generate certified tests. And then there's actions of those certified tests to say, when this test starts, we have an object, an action that says, please inform Soulman to start a T-bomb trace. It starts it, we run our tests automatically, and then we have an action that says, tell the trace to turn off. And then what happens is we prepared all the different data in the background for BPCA to be very, very effective. So we see this as a symbiotic relationship, and it's cyclical, because every time you make a change in business process, you're going to redo this. But the trick is, we need to make sure that this life cycle is as automated as possible and low touch, because that's the complaint I get from people. It's like, I want to do this, but I don't have time to do all this work. So that's why we suggest using Certify as a testing tool to actually document and create your test cases, and then run those test cases. We found that that our customers love us because we're architected for end-to-end business process testing. So we not only can test your SAP apps that actually test, say, your Salesforce that moves into SAP that goes to Manhattan Associates, so that you actually get your data into your SAP system and out of your SAP system, so it exercises all the components. It's very collaborative and easy to use because our business users can actually use this tool. It's not based on scripting. We've got a great IT Central quote on the bottom, because there's no syntax involved with Worksoft Certify. Processes actions are more like an executable documentation, making it much easier to maintain, which we know has always been the problem with automated testing, the scripting and making it easy to maintain. And what we usually find is people have 60 to 80% reduction in their overall testing projects and ongoing maintenance costs, because we're a scriptless object action framework. The scripts are based on using simple narratives to explain what's happening. It's easy to edit the test, and all the assets are stored in a relational repository, so it's easy to maintain them. So if that first step is to discover and create the blueprints, the next step is to actually create those test cases that then get linked in the Solution Manager and run from there. So with Certify, we actually have native integration in the Solution Manager. So when I create my test case in Soulman, I do a right-click and say New Test Case, Scripted, and I select Certify as my test case. It actually allows me to create the test from Solution Manager. I can pass data containers from Solution Manager into my test. I can run those, and the results are actually stored in Solution Manager. So the key from our perspective is we're not an outside tool that says we use Excel spreadsheets to pass data. We're highly integrated into the workflow Solution Manager. And these are things that like SAP uses to test SAP. Okay. Now, once we've got those tests that they can run, what's happened? Well, now that our tests are part of Solution Manager and they can be referenced by our blueprints, BPCA can actually do its job. So what's the point of the change analyzer in BPCA? To test what's changed. So, for full regression, you may run all your tests. For minor releases or small changes, the idea is BPCA TSO can actually provide you, based on your transport, the subset of tests to run to ensure that you've tested all your changes going into production. So this is really great, because the scope identified there tells you, based on a transport, these are your T codes, your programs, your objects that are being touched, and then we'll identify the tests to run to verify and exercise down to the object level. So the idea is this really does help you get more risk-based in your solutions and actually reduce the regression scope. So if it takes you 2 weeks to run your full end-to-end, maybe it only takes you half a day to run the very specific tests required. And that's what Change Analyzer is going to give you. So if I walk over onto how Certify is actually going to help you supplement that process, like I said, Analyzer is going to create the blueprint. It's going to generate the automated tests. Those automated tests you can see here in the editor. They're very nice. They're the way you want your tests to be written. They're very driver-oriented. I have a separate test for each transaction for VA1, VFO3, VLO1N, and so forth. And you can see I have a driver program that leverages and reuses existing assets. And then my tests are very nice, click actions and telling me what's happening. So you'll notice there's no scripting editors here. It's actually point and click. The next thing is we can actually help you run those tests. So if the tests are linked into Solution Manager, you can choose to kick them off and run them Solution Manager and get your tests there. Now we have a lot of customers who still maintain their tests in Quality Center because, you know, ALM is actually a big deal for certifications for people. And so what we can actually do is our impact analysis automatically imports the changes that BPCA has seen. We then in turn get the STO3 data and overlay that at the key code and program level. And then we'll tell you based on what tests you have in Certify and what key codes, programs, and objects your tests are running against, which your BPCA overlap with those. You can see your coverage of your automated tests. We can then push those automated tests around in our execution manager, and you can schedule them or do it on an event basis. Or we'll build a regression bed in ALM, which literally means we'll create the tests in Quality Center automatically. We'll then create a lab in Quality Center linked to those tests so you can kick that off and run so that your test results are in your system of record, ALM versus in Certify or versus in Solution Manager. Now the other thing we do is we actually will take the T codes and we'll identify where you have gaps, what you don't have test automation for. So it really just helps you with risk analysis. If we tell you this is what's changing, these are the programs or the tests to run to validate those changes, and based on STO3 data, we'll say, hey, you've got some things that aren't covered. So we need to actually make sure those things are covered so you have best risk analysis possible. Okay? So with our suggestion is you want to make this as low touch as possible. So we suggest you use our execution manager for your lights out testing. So we have customers who run these tests on a daily basis because they see the transports that have come in, change analyze, said go run these. The other thing we do is people want to make sure that updating the blueprints is not such a heavy task. So if you have your end users use our discovery technology, you look into analyze to build the blueprints, you build the test. What we suggest is you once a week, say on a Friday night or Saturday afternoon, have execution manager schedule and update your T-bomb. So that means that one of your test steps is to turn on the trace, the test runs, turn off the trace. That way every Monday when you come in, your change analyzer is more effective because you've done your T-bomb updates over the weekend. So the idea is that this becomes a lights out and automated thing, it's much, much better for you. It's something you'll actually do versus seeing it as a task. So what does it mean to actually schedule those? What you literally do is you create a request, an execution manager, you point to it, and you can get from the scheduler perspective say when should this run? And what's key for us is our execution manager isn't just a cron job. It's not just something it schedules. It actually understands how to manage logging into your lab. It understands your Windows boxes, so you log in. It keeps the screen unlocked so your screenshots work. All those different things are working together. So it's not just a scheduler. It's a scheduler plus the environment management. Because you know it's not as simple as you think to start a script to kick off in the desktop application and get screenshots, right, and get reports on top of that. So that's what Execution Manager does for you. So kind of summary back and bring it together. What does Solution Manager integration with Worksoft Certify give you? It allows us to create, edit, and execute and view the results of certified processes directly from within Solution Manager. The test results are returned into Solution Manager and stored in the Solution Manager database, so it can be your single point of truth. We fully support Solution Manager data containers, so if you want to manage your test data in Fullman, and then those become inputs into our data-driven test and certifying, that's supported. Now, the one thing we do is we take our a PDF file with screenshots of your tests along the way, and we'll import that, those business process procedures, into Solution Manager result. So you not only have the fact that the test ran, but you have system documentation and screenshots to prove the test ran for any auditors. You may want to leave those for some long-term storage. Okay, and then we get the test plan management within Solution Manager. And the nice thing is Solution Manager, the tests are documented there, transfers the certified to run them, and the control comes back. So it seamlessly allows you to request repair activities from the test execution to the test engineer. So it lets you actually work together between I'm authoring the test and running the test and keeping these things updated. So the benefits of actually doing this is we can use our as-is business process that we've discovered and analyzed to create the blueprint versus creating them manually with Notepad and interviewing people and guessing what they've done. The complementary certified processes match the blueprints, so you know that you've actually got your test cases that match your blueprint, so they can be run. And then we can actually help you scale that by running those tests on a regular basis. A lot of customers spend weeklies with their cadence they like to update their T-bombs so that their BPCA and their change analysis and their monitoring tools work more effectively. So at this point, we're about a half an hour into the call, so I'm going to pass over to Mark, and he's going to moderate some of our question and answers.
Thank you, Chris. Now we'll move into the portion of the webinar where we take your questions. As a reminder, you can use the question feature at any time to submit questions for Chris. And our first question is, can you get the business process visualization in Solution Manager 7.1?
Actually, no. The visualization in 7.1 is just that very linear approach. This new BPMN looking model is specifically in the new Solution Manager 7.2. So Solution Manager 7.2 is actually run on the new Fiori HTML5 web pages, and so it's got actually an editor in there where I can draw those or import them. So that's actually new in 7.2. BPCA and MAI, the monitoring tools, are in 7.1 and 7.2, but that part is actually specific to 7.2.
Okay, our next question. How does Analyze capture the business process? You talked about Worksoft Analyze. Can you explain that a little more?
Well, it actually does it quite well, Mark. We actually have a discovery technology. It just sits in the tray on the desktop. We attach into, say, the SAP scripting engine. So as you walk through the transactions, we know what the transactions are, we see your data, and we capture the screenshot. It actually all happens behind the scenes. You can say, start capturing, run through your process, and then capture, and then uploads into Analyze, and it's hosted there for visualization. So we do this for web pages also. So if you've got Fiori apps, you've got Salesforce apps, you've got Workday apps running in the browser, our capture technology works with those also. But it actually works amazingly well for SAP GUI, which we're interested in here.
Okay, a follow-up question on Analyze. Is Analyze running at a user level or a system level? Will it create end-to-end processes automatically, or do you need to stitch together the sub-processes by user?
Okay, so the processes actually get uploaded into Analyze, and Analyze is a hosted SaaS offering. So when you have multiple users working, if you've got users who go, say, do 3 steps, 3 transactions to create the sales order, and then another set of steps to release the order, each user's actions are, if they're multiple T-codes, show up as a line across there. And then if you want to, you can stitch them together to create the end-to-end. So you can say, if one user stopped at this point, I can draw a manual connection line and say these two are connected, so I get that full end-to-end business process when it spans multiple users' desktop.
Okay, our next question. What is the difference between BPCA and Certify Impact for risk-based testing? When would I use BPCA and when would I use Impact?
Okay. So they actually complement each other. You can use BPCA to do dynamic code analysis. You build your T-bombs and figure out what's changed there. Now the output of that information, so that what's changing, you can just solely use in Solution Manager. You can map to your tests in Solution Manager and run them there. Or say you're a Quality Center user. You can use Impact, and you can use BPCA as your change engine, pull that into Impact. We'll then map that to the certified processes and create your library of tests and Quality Center in your test lab to run. Now, Impact can also do change analysis also. So we have our own change engine. It's just static code analysis. So it'll, as every transport's loaded into the system asynchronously, we'll look at the transports, we'll look at the transactions, the programs, the objects, and several levels deeper, figure out what's changed, and then we'll correlate that to your certified processes. Now, our mechanism does not require a T-bomb because we're doing static code analysis, where the SAP Change Analyzer is probably the highest fidelity because it's actually, you're exercising the code and doing dynamic code analysis. So we're talking about the difference between a 98% percentile in our impact, understanding what's changed, versus 100% of BPCA. And for a lot of people, our impact analysis is good enough, 98% understanding of changes, because most likely your changes at a higher level at a program and a T code. And so we'll actually do a good job of mapping those and running the tests for you. So you can use them together or you can use them separate.
And as a reminder, you can use the question feature at any time to submit questions to Chris. Our next question, currently we have some other tools like Panaya and Live Compare. How does the Worksoft package as a whole compare? What sets it apart?
So we're definitely focused around test automation. So Live Compare does a great job of giving you a comparison of ABOP programs and transactions. And you can actually come up with a change list in Live Compare and import that into Impact. And then we will map it to our programs to run. So our focus is really around automated testing and process discovery. Now, Panaya obviously has got some new capabilities on process discovery, but they've traditionally been around assisted manual testing. And so the advantage of using Certify over assisted manual testing is that we can actually run those lights out. So we don't need users to run the test. What happens is we have automated tests, and like I mentioned, you can schedule them to run through Execution Manager, where we log into the Windows boxes, we start the transactions, we run them end to end and shut it down, all without human intervention. So it depends on your approach. If you want to get to a lights out, no human intervention, automated testing, or if you want to do analysis and then assisted manual testing with Panaya.
Okay. To what extent will this work with custom apps and custom T-codes? And I assume they're talking about the blueprinting process.
So your T-codes show up. So when you exercise, say, a ZVA1 versus a VA1, those transports move in, and we see the analysis of them. In those cases, your ZVA1 is still hitting a well-known SAP program. So because we understand T-codes, programs, and objects and lower, we're going to see this. We're going to understand the transport analysis on that, because a lot of times your Z transactions are variations of an existing transaction. So it still works with that.
Okay. When we convert captures into certified scripts, is there a way to automatically find duplicates?
We actually have a new feature coming out. You'll be hearing about it for Process Compare, which will help you find duplicate processes. So there's a new, I'll give you I guess a teaser or a spoiler alert that the next release of Certify, which we'll be announcing next week, has a new Process Compare to actually see those things. So it'll help you find the duplicates of your processes. So teaser alert, you'll see it next week.
Fantastic, thanks. The next question, does this solution carry the step-level detail into the blueprint?
Yes, you can. It's kind of up to you. What we've decided is within Blueprint, you get the T-code level, and that's where your big blue boxes are. When we create that document, that generated document shows a screenshot and the individual steps the users took, that PDF document we can attach into the Blueprint so users can see what actually happened behind that T-code. So the way we're doing it is we're attaching our PDF, our GenDoc PDF, into there. And that's that screenshot I showed you. You saw the full screen, you saw the individual fields, the data they entered in the field, the physical names, the logical names, and the screenshot. So that PDF is actually attached in. So that way you have that high fidelity documentation there. You don't need that level for the blueprint. We put it there because we think people will be interested in it.
Okay, our next question. I think what they're asking is PCA compliant with S4HANA and the Fiori interface?
So behind Fiori, you're going to have T-codes and programs. So the problem is there's not an easy way right now to do the full mapping. But when you use Fiori and S4HANA or these HTML5 apps, you've got a web interface. That's going to say that that web interface is actually going to the PI/PO layer. Behind that is all your existing ABOP programs. Okay, so when you have changes, you'll know that transport is associated with those T-codes and those programs in there. So at this point, we're not doing the mapping between a web page and the T-code, but that's something we're looking at. So right now, your transport for, say, updating something that's got a Fiori app that's going to have two pieces of work. One is the web pages that get loaded into PIPO to the NetWeaver layer. The other is the ABAP code that supports it behind there. So from the BPCA standpoint, they're seeing the T codes, the programs, the objects, and lower levels. So as long as you exercise those somehow with the T-BOM active, they're going to see the changes are there. So if you had a certified test case that ran through a web page and say Fiori HTML5, behind that is your T codes in your program, the T code or the T-BOM is going to see that change there. So it works. It's not as elegant as it could be. It'll get better in the future. Right now, you're still identifying T codes, but realize behind those T codes or programs, behind those web pages, it's an ABAP program. And what we're actually validating is ABAP program changes.
Does Worksoft certify support automation for SuccessFactors?
Oh yeah, quite well actually. We have a thing called Capture, and it actually has predefined definitions for SuccessFactors, for Hybris, for Workday, for Salesforce. So we come down to our object action framework, and we've actually gone through those applications and figured out what tables look like, what calendars look like, what radio buttons and drop-downs look like. And so when you go and you test those things, you'll enjoy that same level of experience you would with the SAP GUI. You just activate the cross-browser, set your definitions that you want, and you walk through it, and we give you those object actions. So it's actually pretty cool the way it works. It's core to our technology.
We have some great questions coming in and time for a few more, so as a reminder, feel free to submit them at any time. The next question, can we use Certify for process automation?
Sure. It's interesting because if you look at process automation tools, some people call them RPA, robotic process automation tools. They are similar to testing tools, except testing tools tend to be a little more data-driven and have a lot more verbose checking of screens and reports. But yes, we have lots of customers who, when they do, say, an SAP upgrade, one of their steps is they need to go add new data to a system, or they need to pull data out, do a transformation on the data, and push it back in. And so that process automation, we have lots of customers not only do their testing, but in terms of upgrades or migrations, people into, say, new versions of SAP or a greenfield, they use this for process automation. The reason I would say we're very good at that is we test a lot of technology. So if your process automation, say, for example, is read an Excel spreadsheet, log into the mainframe, enter this data here, go into, say, the HR module, and SAP, enter the new customer there, and then log into, say, a website to do the payroll system, we can do all of that within Certify. So that type of process automation where we take, say, here's a new customer from Excel spreadsheet and ripple it across multiple systems that aren't connected, we're very good at that, and people do use us for it.
Our next question is about Impact. Does Impact provide a list of tests that are not covered by Certify?
Yes. Yeah, so when we use our Impact, you can use the data that comes out of BPCA, or you can use the data that we've determined that's changed. We'll give you two things. We'll give you a list of the certified programs to run that exercise the changes. We align that with your STO3 data so that's shown. We also show you the changes that don't have automated coverage. We overlay the STO3 data there. So ideally, if you have changes that you need manual testing, you can look at your usage. If you don't actually use those programs and those screens, you don't need to test them. If you have STO3 data, it's a 100 uses, 10,000 uses, obviously that's something that's a candidate for your automation library, but you would need to manually test it to move that transport in. So we do give you the differences between that. And the key is we always map the usage data, your STO3, so you don't go build automation that you don't need.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Are there restrictions on the number of hierarchies in Solution Manager 7.2?
There's not in 7.2. In 7.1, you had 3 levels of hierarchies. In 7.2, the new engine lets you build your own levels of hierarchies, which is really kind of nice. Because before, what you had to do was make your names of your processes and your hierarchies kind of embedded meanings. Like this is for country USA versus GB versus, SW, right? Now you can actually build a hierarchy of your locations, your countries, your business processes at multiple levels. There was a limitation in 7.1 where we use naming conventions to identify them versus at the 3-tier level versus N-tier level. And then the nice thing is in 7.2 it's N-tier. You can do as many as you want. So you can organize them by regions or processes and so forth.
All right, great. Thank you, Chris, and thank you to everyone for attending. If we weren't able to get to your question, we will be in touch with more information. As mentioned earlier, we will be sending you a link to a recording of the webinar, and if you're interested in learning more about Worksoft, please visit our website. Thank you for your time today. This concludes the webinar. Have a great day.